Bless the Lord, O my soul. Blessed art thou, O Lord.
Well, welcome to episode 5 of Finding the Church Jesus Built, the new edition. This is going to be, if you're following along in the book that we have, Finding the Church Jesus Built, you would be in chapter 7. I think that's maybe around page 89, 88, somewhere in that vicinity. Lunch in Paradise. Last week we dealt with being created in the image and likeness. And Adam and Eve were created and they were placed in the paradise of Eden. So let's talk about being invited to lunch. The 3rd chapter of Genesis contains the story of the serpent's conversation with Eve, in which the serpent, like a waiter, suggests to Eve that she try something not on the daily menu. According to him, today's special was something prepared especially for her and for Adam from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When asked whether she had been told by God not to eat of any of the trees, Eve corrected the serpent. They could eat from all the trees except the one in the center of paradise, because it would cause them to die if they ate from it. Now you see, Eve had not been formed separately from Adam when God had told Adam not to eat from this particular tree. So how did Eve know she could not eat from the tree? Well, obviously Adam had told her. You see, they were a team living by values. Eve was part of an us with Adam. But the serpent scoffs. You're not going to die. God knows you'll become like him if you eat from it. Well, seen from this new perspective, the fruit looked particularly tasty and exquisite. Eve accepted the invitation to lunch. She ate of the fruit. Adam, who had finally arrived for their lunch date, walked up as Eve took that first bite. She rolled her eyes in delight and held out the fruit to Adam for him to sample. He ate. Now this is a husband and wife meeting for a lunch date. The husband arrives late. The waiter has already suggested an appetizer while she waits for him. She has just taken the first bite when he arrives. She holds out a bite for him. How many times is this scene repeated in the movie Julie and Julia, about Julia Childs? This scene in the garden is a human scene. It is the way husbands and wives share food. But this was no ordinary piece of fruit. The serpent served them. The cosmos was turned inside out. Everything changed before their eyes, and they knew they were naked. The shock of being naked might have been like that scene in the movie The Proposal, when Ryan Reynolds' character Andrew has undressed to take a shower, not knowing Sandra Bullock's character Margaret can't find her towel after having taken her shower. They bump into each other and in a panic shout, "Naked! Why are you naked? You're so naked!" It's a comical scene. Did you know we're the only species that knows we're naked? Dogs don't. Cats don't. Animals at the zoo don't. You see, we've been naked ever since Adam and Eve had lunch together that day. Now, God normally visited Adam and Eve in the garden in the cool of the day. But Adam and Eve were nowhere in sight. What's wrong here? Adam, where are you?" Well, Adam and Eve came out of hiding. Now God asked them a very simple question. Did you eat of the tree that I told you not to? This is a simple question. It only has two answers, yes or no. Adam and Eve never answer God's question. Adam blames God for giving him such a lousy wife that she would give him forbidden fruit in the first place. Taking her cue from Adam, Eve blames the serpent for having invited her to lunch in the first place. This whole scene is so painfully human. This is the way we act. As we've done before, let me share with you some comments made by various fathers of the church. The reply that God sought. Novation, and his dates are there in the book. Novation. The fact that God searches for Adam does not proceed from any ignorance on the part of God, but it manifests man's hope of a future discovery and salvation in Christ. John Chrysostom. You see, since he was not unaware of the truth when he, God, asked them, but rather knew, and knew very well, he shows consideration for their limitations so as to demonstrate his own loving kindness, and he invites them to make admission of their faults. Ephraim the Syrian. Instead of confessing what he had done, which would have helped him, he related what had been done to him, which did not help him at all. Adam again failed to confess his folly and blamed the woman. Ephraim the Syrian again. If Adam and Eve had sought to repent after they had transgressed the commandment, even though that they would not have regained that which they had fully possessed before the transgression of the commandment, they would have escaped from the curses that were decreed upon the earth and upon them. Simeon the new theologian. Do you see, dear friend, how patient God is? For when he said, Adam, where are you? And when Adam did not at once confess his sin, he said, I heard your voice, O Lord, and I realized that I'm naked and hid myself. God was not angry, nor did he immediately turn away. Rather, he gave him, Adam, the opportunity of a second reply and said, who told you that you were naked? Unless you ate of the tree that I told you not to eat of. Now consider how profound are the words of God's wisdom. He says, why do you say that you are naked, but hide your sin? Do you really think I see only your body, but do not see your heart and your thoughts? It is as though God said, do you really think you can hide from me? Do you imagine that I do not know what you have done? Will you not say, I have sinned? Yes, say it is true, Master. I have transgressed your command. I am fallen. I am greatly at fault for disobeying your word. Have mercy upon me. But he does not humble himself. He does not bend. The neck of his heart is like a sinew of iron. Had he said this, he might have stayed in paradise. By this one word of repentance, he might have spared himself the whole cycle of evils without number that he endured by his expulsion. Again, Ephraim the Syrian. Since Adam did not wish to confess his folly, God came next to question Eve and said to her, What is this that you have done? Eve too, instead of making supplication with her tears and bearing the fault herself, so that mercy might take hold of both her and her husband, she responded by saying, not the serpent counseled or seduced me, but the serpent deceived me, and I ate. When the two of them had been questioned and were both found to be wanting in remorse or true contrition, God then went to the serpent, not to make inquiry, but to render punishment. For where there is opportunity for repentance, it is right to inquire and ask. But to one who is a stranger to repentance, judgment is fitting. Simeon, the new had left Adam, he came to Eve. He wanted to show her that she too would be cast out if she was unwilling to repent. So he said, what is it that you have done? So that at least she might be able to say, I have sinned. You know, in our language we'd say, I blew it. I made a mistake. I goofed. What else did God need to speak these words? Why else did he need to ask her? Unless to enable her, give her the opportunity to say, in my folly, O Master, I have done this and I've disobeyed you. Have mercy on me. But she didn't say this. What did she say? The serpent beguiled me. How senseless. Oh, so you have spoken with the serpent who speaks against your master? Him you have preferred to the God who made you? You have valued his advice more highly and held it to be more true than the commandment of your master? So also, when Eve was unable to say, I have sinned, both were cast out from the place of enjoyment. They were banished from paradise and from God. Orthodox of Gaza. Again, after Adam had done wrong, God gave him a chance to repent and be forgiven, and yet he kept on being stiff-necked and unrepentant. For God came to him and said, Adam, where are you? Instead of saying, from what glory have you come? What have you done to yourself? He doesn't come with that tone of voice. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? That's what we say to our kids, right? Aren't you ashamed? God doesn't do this. Why did you sin? Why did you go astray? Da 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 da. As if urging him or wanting him to say, forgive me. But there was no sign of humility. There was no change of heart, but rather the contrary. He replied, the wife that you gave me. Mark you, not my wife deceived me, but the wife you gave me. As if to say, this disaster you placed on my head, it's all your fault for giving her to me. So it is, my brethren, when a man has not the guts to accuse himself, he does not hesitate to accuse God himself. Then God came to Eve and said to her, why do you not keep the command I gave you, as if saying, if you would only say, forgive me, to humble your soul and be forgiven, and again not a word. No, forgive me. She only answered, the serpent deceived me, as if to say, the serpent did wrong. What concern is that to me? What are you doing? Kneel in repentance. Acknowledge your fault. Take pity on your nakedness. But neither the one nor the other stooped to self-accusation. No trace of humility was found in either of them. And now look and consider how this was only an anticipation of our state. We've been talking about us as well. We like to hide the same way. See how many and great the evils it has brought on us. This self-justification, this holding fast to our own will, this obstinacy in being our own guide. Okay, that's the lunch in the garden. Now, we want to look at how, first of all, the West understands what we've just read and looked at. We'll try to get all that in before our break, and when we come back from the break, we'll look at how we're looking for the church that Jesus built. We'll look at how the Eastern Church, when we go east of Italy, we'll discover how that church and that Christianity understands the story of Adam and Eve having that lunch that day. So, we come now to the consequences of, and this event is known as the fall in at least Western theology and probably Eastern theology as well, the fall of mankind into our own disobedience and the consequences of it, if you will. So the Western version, and I think the diagram is there in your book, but I'll write it on the board just as so. We have that we have been made in the image and likeness. And we're looking at how the West understands this. The West understands the creation of mankind differently from the East. For the West, both the image and the likeness were completed and finished in Adam and Eve. Meaning this, God said in Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our own image and likeness. And in Genesis 1:27, the next verse, and he made them in the image of God, male and female, he made them. Now for the West believes that the image was completed. I don't want to write all that out. I'm just going to say it was done. Finished. And the likeness was done, so that Adam and Eve had the image and the likeness, as the West reads Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. Let us make man in our own image and likeness, and God made them in the image of God, male and female, he made them. The West understands those two verses, that Adam and Eve were completely done in having the image and completely done in having the likeness. And therefore, in the fall, the eating of the fruit on that day, in that act, understood as an act of disobedience in the West, the image of God in them was totally smashed and destroyed, and the likeness of God in them was totally smashed and destroyed. The consequence of that lunch in the West is that the complete destruction of the image of God and the likeness of God inside Adam and Eve and all of us born since then. This brings us now to the doctrine of original sin. According to St. Augustine, a Western theologian writing at the late 300s and early 400s, all the descendants of Adam and Eve inherited their guilt for having that lunch. At birth, all humans are born guilty, and are going to hell to pay for Adam and Eve's sin. This doctrine was invented by Augustine in the West in the 400s. Original sin is a doctrine of the Catholic Church, and in the 1500s, Luther and John Calvin made it the foundation of Protestant Reformation and Protestant theology. Liberal churches today may now reject original sin along with everything else they reject, but original sin is the key doctrine of Western Christianity, both Catholic and Protestant. Whether you accept it or don't, it's what created Catholic civilization. Augustine's doctrine of original sin and punishment in hell are deeply embedded in the fabric of Western culture. They are so pervasively embedded that they are part of the cultural givens of Western culture. It is almost impossible for a Westerner to think of Christianity without automatically assuming original sin and going to hell. Now, we happen at this moment in this country to be going through a long cultural war, the tail end of it maybe, and Christianity is now being lumped together as something bad. The whole culture is turning against this whole idea that they've heard for 500 years that God's mad at us and sending all of us to hell. Well, I'm just not going to believe that anymore. Welcome to today in our world. And anyway, that's not what I'm talking about, but you can see the implications and application of this being embedded in our culture. And if the culture is finally saying, no way, Jose, then we're in a whole different era of time and identity, and looking for the church Jesus built becomes even more crucial to us. In order to understand the difference between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity, it is necessary to clarify the difference by making explicit the content of original sin and hell so easily taken for granted in the West. Let's just spend the time and just get it to the nitty-gritty of it. A brief overview of Augustine's theology. Seth Farber wrote an excellent overview of Augustine's theory of original sin and its historical development in Western Christianity. The following excerpts are from The Reign of Augustine by Farber. Augustine asserts that all human beings bear the guilt for Adam's original sin without any scriptural basis other than a mistranslation of Romans 5:12. Augustine insisted that all men are understood to have sinned in that first man because all men were in him when he sinned. Thus, according to Augustine, due to Adam's sin, every person belongs to a mass of perdition, to a massa damnata, mass of damnation, to a unity of negativity, as Paul Tillich put it. Augustine wrote, the damned lump of humanity was lying prostrate, nay, was wallowing in evil, was falling headlong from one wickedness to another, and joined to the faction of the angels who had sinned, it was paying the most righteous penalty for its impious treason. Baptism was necessary to acquit human beings of their crime. Thus, Augustine argued that infants who did not receive baptism would be condemned to suffer the torments of eternal punishment in hell. He wrote that no one is to be born of Adam and Eve. No one that is born of Adam and Eve was less a sinner than they were. Such was the greatness of the guilt that the punishment so impaired human nature that what was originally a penal condition for the first parents who sinned became a natural consequence in all of their descendants. Not only do human beings bear the legal liability for Adam's sin, but they also suffer from it as a kind of inherited disease transmitted by Adam. The semen itself, Augustine argued, already shackled by the bond of death, transmits the damage incurred by sin. Everyone he does from a condemned stock is from the first necessarily evil and carnal through Adam. Because it was transmitted by natural propagation, original sin was as universal and inevitable as life itself. Thus, Augustine writes, "The infant is bad, though little. He is already a great sinner." In Augustine's view, human beings thus suffer from original sin in a twofold sense. First, they suffer from a hereditary moral disease, first acquired by Adam and since then transmitted to posterity. Secondly, and more importantly, human beings suffer from original sin in the sense of guilt, of an inherited legal liability to judicial punishment for Adam's sin, for the sin of humanity in Adam. It is the guilt that human beings have incurred as a result of that sin. It is this legal guilt that is removed immediately by the act of baptism, and it is for this reason that infants who die without baptism, according to Augustine, must suffer eternal punishment in hell. The sin of Adam and of humanity through him was such a grievous offense against God's justice that all human beings deserve to suffer eternal punishment. But because of God's infinite mercy, a small predestined elect will be saved through no merit of their own. By the sacrament of baptism, they will be acquitted of the crime of original sin and spared the eternal pains of hell. That's Augustine. Augustinianism, this original doctrine of original sin created by Augustine, was accepted and built upon by others in the West. The expansion of thought based on Augustine is known as Augustinianism. Again, here are Farber's discussion, and I'm not going to go through all of these. They're in your book. You can look at for the sake of time. But it may be helpful to summarize the salient philosophical premises of Augustinianism. First, Augustinianism posits that human beings are at present are lacking any intrinsic worth and have lost the capacity to freely choose between good and evil. Secondly, the situation was not what was originally intended. Human beings had been created worthy. They were innocent and good, and they deserved God's love. But then a dramatic event occurred. In Augustine's version, Adam's sin. destroyed the pristine plenitude of being. Lofty words, bringing tragedy in its wake. The paradise that man inhabited was transformed into a hell. Man was transformed from a godlike being into a vile wretch. Thirdly, mankind is now divided into two groups: an elect destined by God to be rescued from its plight and restored to its original condition, and the masses doomed to eternal torment in hell. And now let me just skip numbers 4, 5, and 6, not because they're not important, but for the sake of time. Turn on over, I think, to maybe, page 100 or so in your book. Let's look at Martin Luther. Augustine's greatest work, The City of God, was written after the sack of the city of Rome in 410 and before his death in 430. The City of God gave birth to Western Christianity and to what became the Roman Catholic Church that created Western civilization. Over 1,000 years later from Augustine, Martin Luther and John Calvin protested the abandonment and a modification of the initial roots of Roman Catholic theology based on Augustine against the newer Catholic theological innovations of Thomas Aquinas living in the 1200s, 1226, dying in 1274. In their protest against the Catholic Church, Luther and Calvin reasserted the theology based on Augustine. Their protest became the Protestant Reformation, and Augustine's theology became the foundation of Protestant theology. Farber has this to say about Luther. Both Luther and Calvin were staunch admirers of Augustine, believing that his legacy had been besmirched by the Catholic Church. Their theologies were consequently based on a reassertion of Augustinian anthropology, understanding of humanity. It is well known that Luther's apostasy from Roman Catholicism and his development of the concept of justification by faith was the final act of his unsuccessful struggle as an Augustinian monk to attain to a sense of sinlessness in which he could be assured that he had attained the favor of God. Despite all the austerities Luther imposed upon himself, he was ultimately left with a sense of his own depravity. And from this he deduced that man was inherently depraved, and as a result could do nothing by his own works to earn or gain the forgiveness of God. Like Augustine, Luther believed that man incurred both the guilt for Adam's sin in paradise and the disease of that sin as it was passed on through the act of procreation. It's just no wonder the West is so hung up with sexuality. It's embedded in the whole roots of being bad. He wrote, "I am a sinner, not because I have committed adultery, not because I've had Uriah murdered, but I have committed adultery and murder because I was born, indeed conceived, and formed in the womb as." So we are not sinners because we commit this or that sin, but we commit them because we are sinners first. That is, a bad tree and a bad seed also bring forth bad fruits, and from a bad root only a bad tree can grow. The image of God that Adam had borne in his soul was replaced by the image of the devil. This entailed a corruption of the whole nature and of all the powers of man, a corruption which infects the mind, the heart, the intellect, and the will. But even worse than the corruption of sin itself is the wrath of God that it incurred, bringing as it did the curse of God and the punishment of death. Since God was eternal and omnipotent, His fury, His anger, His wrath towards self-satisfied sinners is also immeasurable and infinite. This divine justice created horrible torments of the heart and fury of conscience. In these torments or terrors of the conscience that feels God's wrath against our sin and looks for forgiveness of sins and deliverance from sin, it was worse than useless to lay claim to merit by doing good deeds in an attempt to win God's favor. That's Luther. Now we come to John Calvin and total depravity. John Calvin's theology is often summarized by the acronym TULIP. And let me just write it on our board. I think it's spelled out in the book for you. TULIP. T-U-L-I-P. Standing for the 5 points of Calvinism. Every theology student, this is how you memorize the 5 points. Someone invented TULIP. T, total depravity. Total depravity. Total. You and I, each of us, is 100% depraved. 100% wicked, 100% a massive damnation. Not only am I 100% depraved, but the entire species, every human that's ever lived since Adam and Eve, was also 100% depraved. Now that's total depravity. Wow. Total depravity. Bingo. Just woo. And then you, unmerited grace. Unmerited. God wants to show everybody that He's still a God of love. And to do that, just because He's a loving God, He's going to pick a few and save them in spite of themselves. So He's just going to pick some, like Vanna White blindfolded, just picking some numbers or letters or something. Just picking. But God's love and His mercy cannot be taken advantage of. It's not going to go to everybody. It's limited to just a few that get blindly picked by God, and so it is a limited atonement or salvation. Only a few get picked. Well, what if I don't want picked? What if I've gotten used to being totally depraved and it's okay with me? There's no free will. God's this autocratic dictator of the universe. And if I want to pick you, you're picked. Therefore, it is irresistible grace. You don't have a choice in the matter. Irresistible grace. Okay, so I got picked, and I've now put in my 20 years of walking the straight and narrow, and I want to retire. I might want to go to Aruba, have a beer, and look at girls in bikinis on the beach. Tough! You can't get out of this. Once picked, always picked. Or as the bumper sticker says, once saved, always saved. Welcome to American Protestant theology. Once saved, always saved. You got picked. Only difference is we changed the autocratic God to being a democracy, because if you could vote for the dog catcher, you ought to be able to vote for God. So all you have to do is walk down the aisle at the altar call at the end of the service, and you get to cast your vote for God, and that got you saved. And now that you made that choice once, you're locked in forever. Once saved, always saved. Don't you love it? I'm having too much fun. This is stuff. We got to lighten it up a little bit. So, irresistible grace, and I can't get out of it. That's the perseverance of the saints. Perseverance of the once in a nutshell there. Tulip. Here is Farber's comments on Calvin. You can find it in your page. It may be pretty close to where we are. Like Augustine and Luther, Calvin believed that man's nature was altered and irreparably damaged by original sin. He stated, infants bring their own damnation with them from their mother's wombs. The moment they are born, their natures are odious and abominable to God. They're vipers in diapers. Didn't you know that? Some of us in the room are old enough to remember you'd go to the hospital you had a maternity floor, and all the babies were in wherever the nurses kept them, and they had a window. And when there was a newborn, after the baby had been washed and all of the stuff that's done to the newborn, they would be put in a bassinet, and you could be brought on one side of the window, and the family would gather there and ooh and ah over the baby. That was their first look to get to see the grandchild or new brother, sister, whatever. And not one time in all the years that I stood there with somebody, I never once heard anyone say, "Look at that snake." We always were happy and pleased and delightful. Nope. They bring their own damnation with them. They are odious and abominable to God the moment they're born. Self-knowledge leads to self-contempt, which for God. Self-knowledge progresses most when one is crushed and abashed by one's own calamity, poverty, nudity, ignominy, for there is no danger that man can go too far in abasing himself. Go ahead, beat yourself up a little more. It's good for you. And if you need some help, I'll join in and beat you up too. In the process of self-abasement, man stands to discover in God what is missing in himself. Calvin wrote, as a result of the fall, there is an impassable gulf between humanity and God, which only God can bridge. How could man help himself when by the shameful fall he was degraded to death and hell, sullied with so many stains, fettered with his own corruption, and wholly in the power of the curse? Man is not only born guilty in God's sight, but he is tainted by the semen from which he descended. And every one of us that says, I believe in him and I will receive his help, Christ in the courtroom will say, he's one of mine, and he will be excused from his punishment because Christ has already included him in the punishment he took. That's the gist of it. You've got an angry God demanding justice, and you've got cares so much for this wicked humanity, he says, I'll die in their place. The theory of atonement that begins to happen here with this courtroom scene that begins to happen. Now, we are still discussing original sin, and most of it with Calvin and Luther would be from the Protestant point of view. We're going to run out of time, so it's in the book, Original Sin and the Catholics, and the summary issue of the Immaculate Conception. Just quickly summarize, and I'm summarizing Hilda Graf, who is a Roman Catholic scholar and theologian. So I'm using her and quoting her and citing her. That you see, if Christ is fully God and fully man, and if according to Augustine all humanity is depraved, then how did Christ, being fully man, escape the depravity in his humanity? Well, it took a while for that to finally get there. So by 1800, the Catholic Church finally says, we got to deal with that. Now, the Protestants never had a problem with it because they accepted the virgin birth. And since there was no man involved, there was no semen involved, and so Christ would have been born spared from original sin. The Catholics took a different approach. They took the different approach of looking at the mother. If the mother doesn't have original sin, because we can inherit original sin from mom just as well as from dad or from both, since God is the father, then the mother would be the source of depravity, original sin. So the Catholic Church will adopt the theory, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception has nothing to do with the birth of Christ. It is not a reference to the virgin birth of Christ's mother Mary that she gave to Christ. It is the conception of Mary's mother Anna. It's Anna's conception when she conceived Mary. So that when Mary was conceived by the normal generative process of her parents, at that moment, before original sin could zap her, like we all get zapped according to all this, at that moment, she will be excluded. Holy saran wrap, I don't know what it was that deflected it. And so she never had original sin. Therefore, her son was born uncontaminated like the rest of us. That was their answer to the problem of total depravity of the entire species being depraved and all born going to hell. That's the Catholic understanding. When the Protestant Reformation came along, and you've got the Baptists coming out of Switzerland that come into existence, they believed that since the Catholic Church was itself depraved, all of the sacraments ever done by the Catholic Church were therefore invalid, which included baptism. And since without baptism everybody's going to hell, everybody had to be baptized again because the first one didn't count. They would have been called the Anna rebaptizers until everybody of that generation had either been rebaptized or said no thank you. And after that, there was no one to rebaptize. And so the Anna drops out and they become the Baptists, and that group, the evangelicals. And to them then, baptism is no longer taking away original sin. It becomes an act of belief. You didn't baptize babies because they were not able to make that decision. So if that means that the babies are born without sin and they're not going to hell, so you had to come up with a period of grace. We got to cover the kids until they reach the age of accountability, and then after that they're guilty. But until then they're safe on King's X. But after that, you get saved by an intellectual decision to say, I believe this whole story, that Adam did this, Eve did that, I'm going to hell without help, and I want Christ's help, I believe, and I got saved. And, well, you could get babies rebaptized, but it took a story to get adults. And the only way to get adults, particularly women in their hair, to go get rebaptized again was to scare them. And so we have the sinners in the hands of an angry God. Do you know right now that this floor is about to fall out from everyone underneath us, and we're going to discover that we are standing and sitting over the fires of hell at this very moment. And we're sitting here all so comfortable and thinking, I've got plenty of time to decide what I want to do about God in my life. I'm just like this. There's my heart just beating away. I'm a little nervous right now, but I'll go over it as soon as we have a break and I can get away from this nonsense. Everything's going to be fine. Well, you never know when it won't be fine. And you find yourself, in Jonathan Edwards' words, God right now has us dangling over the fires of hell like a spider on a thin web. And he's already taken his arrow out of his quiver. He's put it in his bow. He's got it pulled back. And at any moment, he's going to let that arrow fly, going to nick that, and bam, you're going to find yourself instantaneously burning in hell. Our choir's going to come in just a few minutes, and they're going to start singing, I don't know, maybe Just As I Am Without One Plea. We'll sing that one, or maybe we need one of the new praise songs that might be, He paid a debt I did not owe, I owed a debt I could not pay, I needed someone to wash my... While we're singing that, you come now and let Christ wash your sins away. Up there on the balcony, I see you. We'll wait. Come on down. There's plenty of time. Do not leave here tonight without having made peace with God. Bam. Bam. Let's take a break, okay? We'll come back after our break, and we'll see what the Eastern Church says about everything we just said.
They're unbelievable. They know more than me, for sure. Nothing wrong with that.
No.
I'm just in there relearning and all of
There
it.
you go. That's the fun part of getting to do it.
It is.
Yeah.
Hey, Elizabeth.
I mean, it's like any of the sitcoms that just started out. I mean, like the last season of All.
Let's go.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
I like that. How are you?
From upstairs at work.
Okay.
A couple of observations. This picture of Jesus, it looks a little westernish. And I think that's the Vatican right there.
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
That'd be funny though, wouldn't it?
I tested it and I put Orthodox icons on it, and that would not attract a Protestant to buy the book. Okay, welcome back. Those of you that are Protestant or raised in a Protestant background or haven't been raised Orthodox, everything we've talked about so far might have been eye-opening, but it was essentially still familiar. I have taught this class before when we had maybe 50-50, and the 50 would have been Orthodox, and they always at halftime tell me they can't believe anything I just said could actually be true. They've never heard any of that. It's nonsense. And so therefore, that's where we start right now, an Eastern comment on the Western view. We in the Eastern Church shake our heads in dismay at Western Christianity. At the very least, the West not only has a broken Trinity, but a Trinity that is a dysfunctional family with an explosive, angry Father full of fury, Son that protects humanity by taking the Father's wrath upon himself. To put it simply, the Eastern Church does not believe in original sin. Nor does the Eastern Church believe in the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, and does not believe in the substitutionary atonement. We don't buy any of it. We just shake our heads at it. So therefore, we can ask the question, what is it that the Eastern Church believes? Remember, we started with Genesis 1:26 and Genesis 1:27. The divide between Eastern and Western Christianity actually happens between those two verses. Adam and Eve in creation. Remember, we have image and we have likeness. For the Eastern Church, Genesis 1:26 says, let us make man in our own image and likeness. 1:27 says, and God made man in his image, male and female, he made them. So the image was done. We looked at all of this a couple of weeks ago, if I remember correctly, or last week. Done. Likeness is a process involving our free will. In the lunch that day in the garden, nothing happened to the image. Every single human being that has ever been born, ever lived, who will ever be born, carries the image of God in them. You carry the image of God in you. The likeness is a process. The process is based on a relationship of who we're spending time with, whom we're spending time to become like them. It is a process of becoming based upon a relationship. And it is the relationship that was broken by man, by an act of our will. I don't want to do it God's way. I want to do it, oh yeah, I got a better offer. I think I'll take it. That choice, we made a choice, and it broke the relationship. And that's what we're looking at. In the fall of man, the image of God was not destroyed in Adam and Eve. All humanity continues to carry within each of us the image of God. Every person possesses self-worth because they carry within themselves the image of God. Everyone, no matter what we may have done, we still have the image of God and still have value and worth in us because of it. We are not a mass of damnation. We are not born a viper in diapers. We are not odious to God. We were not odious to our parents when we were born. In the fall, the process of likeness, of becoming like those with whom we associate, the process remains intact. What is now missing is our relationship with God. The relationship between God and mankind was broken. After the fall, we can no longer become like God because we no longer have a relationship with God. Mankind no longer walks with God in the cool of the evening. We have separated ourselves from God. No strings attached. The relationship between God and mankind has been broken. The fall did not break this relationship in the sense like you could knock a lamp off a table and it fall and smash. It is not the fall that smashed us. Adam freely chose to break the relationship. You see, it is not an affair that breaks a marriage. It is the choice to have the affair. An affair is not the cause, but the result of choosing to break the relationship. This is just the way you've chosen to break it, but you made the choice. It is this broken relationship that is meant by the fall. The fall is what creation looks like without God. You want to know what a world without God looks like? Welcome to 21st century America. Look at your newspapers, listen to your TV shows, news channels, get your social media. You want to see what chaos looks like? Welcome. We're living in it. Not all yet, but you get the point. It's the headlines every day that we bump into. The fall of man, and for that matter, sin, is not to be understood as bringing about something new. There is no creative power in evil, but as revealing and actualizing the limitations and potential dangers inherent in creation is left to itself. Every school teacher knows if you walk out of that classroom and are gone long enough, you will not come back to everyone diligently sitting in their desk, quietly doing their lessons. There could be chaos in that room, and it really doesn't matter how old they are, depending on whatever the chaos. The absence, we have the chaos that comes shows there's a limitation inbuilt in creation. Creation is not meant to be left to itself anymore. A class of first graders or 12th graders are meant to be left alone in that classroom unattended very long. Think of a kite choosing to cut the string of the one who flies it in order for the kite to be free to fly on its own. Hey, I don't need the string. I want to do it my way. The disaster that befalls the kite is not created it's not created when it smashes. It's written there. I've got my notes wrong. It's actually created by the choice to cut the string. It's the choice that creates the calamity. Let's say that you have a kite, and if you've been in Oklahoma, there are certain days the wind is just nice, and you can put a kite up, and then there's other days the kite will just, you can't make them strong enough to survive the wind that we have coming. The disaster that happens when that string breaks, and boy, you take off chasing after the kite if you can, because you want to catch it before it damages itself when it hits the ground. But the disaster that happens to a kite when the string breaks reveals something. The disasters that happen in our society and culture, they reveal something. They're revelatory. And what is revelatory about the kite is the kite is never intended to fly without a string attached to it, held by its owner. A kite is not intended to be flying free in the sky. The kite, in choosing and claiming to exist independently, in choosing to exist without reference to the one who holds the string, has made itself a god to itself. The disaster that happens reveals the truth that the kite was never intended to exist as its own god, its own master. The kite, however, prefers the freedom of not being tied or attached, not being in a relationship via the string with its owner. Prefers that freedom to having an orderly and disaster-free flying by virtue of having a relationship with the owner by the string. In terms of the kite, the crash of the kite is what is meant by the fall of mankind. Mankind chooses to decide that its existence has nothing to do with its Creator, with God. The results of that decision, the crashing and burning around us daily, on the news across the world, the results of that decision reveals we are wrong. The results, the fall, reveals our existence is in fact dependent on having a relationship with God. Like the kite, we demand our freedom and we cut the string. And we crash and burn again and again. This is the fall. This is what living with no strings attached looks like. Paradise lost. Orthodox Christianity uses the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, which predates by over 1,000 years the Hebrew version upon which the Protestant Old Testament is based. The Septuagint calls the Garden of Eden paradise, paradisos, after the ancient Persian paradisa, meaning enclosed parkland. The term appears 26 times in the Old Testament in the Septuagint, 13 times, half of them, in the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, and another 13 times scattered throughout the Old Testament. Each of these references in the Old Testament uses the term paradise with the larger sense of a parkland, an orchard, or a lush cultivated area. There is another term in Greek, kypos, that means a cultivated garden or vegetable garden. The term kypos is found 32 times in the Septuagint and 4 times in the New Testament, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Gethsemane. The terms paradise and kypos are not synonyms. However, most English Bibles translate both terms English term garden. The term paradise is never found in an English translation of the Old Testament. Not so far as I've been able to discover. But the term paradise is found 3 times in the Greek New Testament and is transliterated as paradise all 3 times in every English Bible. New Testament translates it, transliterates it, gives us paradise. Old Testament in English. The first time in the New Testament is in Christ's conversation with Dismas, the good thief, who was crucified along with the other thief with Christ. The other thief mocked Christ. "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other answered, rebuking him, and said, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." And he was saying, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise." The second time the term is used, it's by St. Paul when he writes to the Corinthians, "I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or out of the body I do not know, God knows, such a man was caught up to the third heaven. And I know how such a man, whether in the body or apart from the body I do not know, God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words which a man is not permitted to speak." Finally, the third time the term paradise is used in the New Testament is found in the book of Revelation. "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God." Never in the New Testament do the translators translate the Greek paradisos as garden. Instead of translating, they transliterate. They write the Greek paradisos using our English alphabet. Paradisos becomes paradise. It is obvious in the New Testament the term paradise means more than a garden. The passage in the book of Revelation makes a direct connection of the Christian gospel with the tree of life in the paradise of Eden. The use of the term paradise 13 times in the story of Adam and Eve, and it's used 3 times in the New Testament, points to a much larger meaning of the term paradise. This larger meaning is lost in our English Bibles that do not use the term paradise in telling the story of Adam and Eve. To understand what is lost in an English Bible, reread Genesis 2 and 3, and you say paradise instead of garden all 13 times instead. Now, I must confess, we are grateful to have the Orthodox Study Bible. Very grateful for it. The Old Testament contains the Septuagint. The New Testament, we were required in order to get it published, contains the New King James Version of the New Testament, but in the New Testament, paradise is found in the New King James translation. But the leaders of those getting the study Bible created all had been former Protestants, and sometimes you don't get rid of that piggybacking end. And if I'm not mistaken, unless they've changed it in a recent edition, the book of Genesis in the Orthodox Study Bible says garden. So I'm just letting you know that up front, so when you go check me out and you say, wait a minute, it says garden in the Orthodox Study Bible, that's a mistake. The word is paradisos, paradise, that is there. If you have paradise, then, and the other times in the Old Testament, it refers to a cultivated area, a great farmland or something. But in the book of Genesis, chapter 2 and 3, paradise with the tree of life means something connected to the three examples in the New Testament of paradise. And so you have in Genesis and Revelation the tree of life and paradise together. That's revelatory for us. It points to something bigger than a garden. The unity of the first Adam in the Old Testament and the second Adam in the New Testament is lost when paradisos is not translated with the same English word. First Adam, paradise, tree. Second Adam, paradise, tree. The Eucharist, the tree of life. Wow, it all is lost in an English Bible. It is Christ, the second Adam, who rescues the first Adam from living in death that he chose. Through Christ, Hades is despoiled, Adam is recalled from the dead, the curse is made void, Eve is set free, death is slain, and we are endowed with life. Christ did not come to save us from an angry God. There is no angry God. Our God is the only lover of mankind. Christ rescues us from our mistakes. He rescues us from what we have done. He rescues us from death and restores us to life. He restores us to paradise. Dismas, the penitent thief, asks to be remembered in Christ's kingdom. Christ grants him the kingdom by granting him entrance to paradise. Paradise and the kingdom are synonyms of the same reality of the presence of God. The passage from the book of Revelation points us to the unity of the kingdom of God and paradise by pointing us back to the tree of life within the paradise of God in Eden. In reference to Dismas, the crucifixion service of Holy Week in the Orthodox Church declares, the thief opened the locked gate of Eden with the key, remember me. That Dismas on the cross unlocked the gate of Eden to paradise with the key, remember me. The paradise created for Adam and Eve was more than a lush physical garden. This understanding is lost in English translations that use garden instead of paradise. Paradise was the kingdom of God. It was filled with both spiritual and physical realities. It contained both the visible and the what is invisible today was visible then. God, the undivided Trinity, Ha'on, the existing one, the is, the am, the source of all existence, walked there in the cool of the evening. He who is life gave life and existence to all living things. But the world of death, Adam and Eve chose death. They broke their relationship with Him who is life, who gives life and is the source of life, in whom we live and move and have our being. They chose death. They chose to live in death. This life which most people today assume is natural, St. Gregory of Nyssa called a life in death. We look like we are alive, but we are living in death. We no longer are living in life. We have chosen death, and we live in Hades, the realm of death. We are in fact the zombies, the living dead, that we see marching through our cities at Halloween. We are the crew of the pirate ships in the movies The Pirates of the Caribbean. We are dead men walking. The kingdom of God is no longer visible to us. We have become colorblind. There are colors we no longer see. We no longer see the angels. We no longer hear them singing. Like whistles only dogs can hear, there are sounds we can no longer hear. We have lost our hearing. We have lost the kingdom of God. We are now blind to God's presence. We are now deaf to the sound of His voice. We cannot anymore walk with God we cannot see, nor speak with a God we cannot hear. We have lost paradise and are only left with a physical garden with its weeds. This is the fall of man. The great choice to live within death. We who once lived within life now live within death. We who once lived in the midst of the invisible now are trapped within the lifeless world of visible matter. Think of yourself in a large, magnificent room filled with the greatest works of art ever created. Everywhere you turn, you are surrounded by such beauty, it leaves you speechless. Now suppose you put on a blindfold. Now you can no longer see anything in the room. You can still hear the sounds of other people, but you cannot see them. Everything still exists, but you can't see them. Now suppose you place plugs in your ears so that no sounds can be heard. Everything and everyone are still in the room, but now you are cut off from everything that is in the room. That is what happened to Adam and Eve. They chose death. They lived in life, but they chose death. They became blind to the presence of the angels. They became deaf to the sound of God walking beside them. The angels were still there. God was still there. But they chose to live in the claustrophobic world of their own five senses. They chose to live in death. What we think is life is really death. We are all walking dead men and women. We are walking skeletons. We are the living dead waiting our turn to be buried. We're all dead. We're either the walking dead or the buried dead. Either way, we're all dead. A funeral for the fall of man. Having chosen death, mankind died. God placed the cherubim to guard the tree of life. Adam and Eve were left to live out their death. They had children who too would die. We are the only species that knows it is naked. We're the only species with the ability to show emotion with tears. We are also the only species that knows we are going to die. This is our knowledge of good and evil. We know we are naked, we know how to cry, and we know we will die. But knowledge in itself does not make us like God. We stand where paradise once stood. It has vanished. It has become invisible. We no longer see the kingdom. We no longer hear the angels. We no longer walk with God in the cool of the evening. We stand in paradise and cannot see it or hear it. We have lost it all. We now live in a world of death, and already we anticipate our funeral, singing our own funeral dirge as we make our way towards our own funeral. With St. John of Damascus, we sing our funeral hymn. What earthly sweetness remains unmixed with grief? What glory stands immutable on earth? All things are but feeble shadows. All things are most deluding dreams. Yet one moment only, and death shall supplant them all. Woe is me! What manner of ordeal does the soul endure when it is parted from the body? Woe is me! How many then are its tears, and there is none to show compassion? Turning its eyes to the angels, it supplicates in vain. Stretching out its hands to men, it finds none to aid. Thy creating command was my origin and my foundation. For it was thy pleasure to fashion me out of nature visible and invisible, a living creature. From the earth thou didst shape my body, and didst give me a soul by thy divine and quickening breath. When in the beginning thou didst create man after thine own image and likeness, paradise to reign over thy creatures. But when beguiled by the malice of the devil, he tasted of the food, he became a transgressor of thy commandment. I weep and I wail when I think upon death, and behold our beauty, fashioned after the image of God, lying in the tomb disfigured, dishonored, bereft of form. O marvel, what is this mystery which shall befall us? Why have we been given over to corruption? And why have we been wedded to death? Truly, as it is written by the command of God, we are naked, we are filled with sorrow, we weep and we wail when we think upon death and remember what we have lost. We are naked, we are filled with sorrow, we weep and we wail. We who once lived in life, now wedded to death. We are naked, and we are filled with sorrow, we weep and we wail. And with St. Paul we cry out, wretched man that I am, who will set me free from the body of this death? Now, we've just spent some sobering moments together, but I want you to just reflect for a second on how you felt before halftime and our break, being threatened with burning in hell by an angry God, and how you feel right now about being told the truth of the human condition and our own lives. I dare say it gives us pause, and it doesn't frighten us. It gives us hope. Who will deliver us? Is there a deliverer? Now, normally we would come back next week. We're not going to come back because of the way the schedule worked out. It's after Christmas. But I will tell you what next week is when we do have it. And that one is called, off here, the Christmas. Sometimes we actually get it in before Christmas. It did work out this year. So, Merry Christmas to you in advance. Happy New Year to you. God bless you. And God willing, we'll see each other for the Christmas story after Christmas. I guess if we were on the old calendar, it would be before the old calendar celebrates it, but on our calendar, we'll come back. So God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you in January. Thank you.
Bless the Lord, O my soul. Blessed art thou, O Lord. Bless the Lord, O my soul. And all that is within me, bless his holy name.